This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, welcome to a new week. We're finally starting to turn the corner on spring weather. Well, at least we hope we are here in the Northeast. I hope things are moving in the right direction where you are as well. I am not a winter guy. I am a warm weather, spring, summer kind of guy. This is the time of year, and we're walking into the time of year that I live for, right? I want to be outside. I want to be, walking around my backyard in my bare feet. I want to be digging in the dirt. I've got lots of home improvement projects that I want to do. I know that I have some friends who are real winter geeks, and they love the snow and they love snowing and skiing and snowboarding and all that good stuff. And you got yours this year. I'll just put it that way. You got yours. Congratulations. Now I want mine. So I'm really looking forward to the warmer weather. We had a great. By the time this posts, we will have had a great weekend here in the Northeast. So hope it continues to move in the right direction and those temperatures continue to creep up and we get more hours of daylight and sunshine. It also seems like we're moving in the right direction in terms of COVID here in our country. And boy, aren't we glad to hear that. More than 150 million shots given, vaccinations given. My pediatrician friend is going to, Dr. Christina Johns is going to yell at me for calling them shots, calling them jabs in the arm. And I agree with her. If we're going to destigmatize these vaccinations for certain people who are still afraid of them, and I don't know why you would still be afraid of this, but we got to call them vaccinations, right? And it looks like we're moving in the right direction there as well, with more and more people being vaccinated, and also the CDC loosening guidance on social distancing in the schools, which is also great as more and more kids hopefully get back into the classroom, and as we walk towards getting back into the classroom full time for everybody in September. I think that's got to be the goal for all of us. Is getting all the kids back into the classroom come fall. I've said this for a long time, that the schools are a key part of our economy, and they're a key to getting past this pandemic. And that's not to diminish the hundreds of thousands of people who have passed because of this pandemic. But plainly said, parents cannot get back to work if the kids are not in school. If parents have to be home because the kids are home, parents can't work or go to work. And even if they're working from home, they cannot work as effectively. And, I'll raise my hand as one of the parents who have been home, even on a hybrid schedule, helping kids out. And my son has been very, very self-sufficient in this. But, being home, you still got to be checking in. You still got to be, sort of looking over the shoulder. And especially early days, looking over the shoulder, making sure everything's going okay, doing something as simple as making sure the Wi-Fi is connected and it's not glitching or it's not breaking down, because I'm working from home all day too when he's home. So you got two people who are just crunching all day long on that Wi-Fi. And so if the Wi-Fi is kind of sketchy in your neighborhood, that's a problem too. Here, we're going down this rabbit hole here, but my whole point is that parents can't get back to work if kids aren't in school. And the kids need and want to be with their friends too. So we got to work towards getting kids back in school full time in the fall. And that means us parents have to stand up here. I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit. Stand up, pull our pants up and go, we're doing everything we possibly can do to push this thing in the right direction. And we're not going to deny science, and we're not going to deny good, the CDC guidelines. We're not going to deny these things just because it seems inconvenient to wear a mask or inconvenient that we can't go out to dinner or what have you. Let's just hike it all up, boys and girls, and make sure that we get back to where we're supposed to be. Okay. Sermon over. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. But speaking of TED Talks, I'm solo again this week. We're taking a break from guests because we're going to talk about a topic that's been debated about as long as I've been in PR. And I'm hoping to engender lots of conversation on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So chime in on this one as we dive into it. Let's jump in. I want to talk this week about the news release, what it is, how we PR people use it, how news people perceive it, or at least how I think news people perceive it. I used to be a reporter, and sort of what it's worth in our modern PR vocabulary, in our modern PR day to day. So let's level set here. What is the news release, right? Now, depending on where you've worked and who your mentors have been, you might have different vocabulary around this, right? A news release, a press release, a media release. For my dollar, I don't care what you call it. It's the thing that's got the contact information at the top and the headline and the date line and all the information about the client and all the information about the story you want people to write, or the information about the news that you are announcing. Your boilerplate at the bottom and the three little hashtags to indicate that you're done with the document. That's been my training, right? And for that, I call that a news release. Why? Because I'm announcing news. That's the vehicle that we use to announce news. So if you want to call it a press release, for my money, I don't care. Call it a press release. Call it a media release. It doesn't matter to me. It is different from other things like a media advisory, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's also different or an event advisory, those kind of the same thing. And obviously also different from lots of other written vehicles that you'll put out to media for their use in getting your client coverage or getting the news out that you want to get. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to call it a news release here. And there actually is a good definition that I came upon on newswire.com. What's the difference between a press release and a media advisory? And it kind of goes through all the same stuff. What is a press release? They define it as an official news that provided to journalists and other media representatives to talk about news, right? A product launch, a merger, an acquisition, round of new funding. It also includes in here a live event that will take place. I consider that to be a media advisory. And I describe an advisory to my clients as an invitation. This is like an invitation to cover something that is coming up, right? So that's a media advisory separate from a news release, which is about news that has happened that you are announcing as of today or as of the date that is on the news release. You can check out this definition of what a press release or a news release or whatever it is on newswire.com. Just take a search for it, and we'll throw the link up there on our Facebook page. But for my money, the news release, it announces something that your client wants the media to pay attention to. And like some of those definitions were, we did this thing. We accomplished this goal. We hired this person. We're going to be opening our museum. We're going to be holding an event. And that also is separate from a media advisory. Because if you're looking for advanced coverage of something, and I just did this with a client, we created both a news release and a media advisory for the same event. Why? Because we put out the news release well in advance for public consumption, to let media to say to media, we want you to report on this in advance to your audiences, to let them know that this thing is going to happen, that they can come and they can participate in. It was the opening of a local business, so we created a news release and we sent that out. So that media outlets would report on that this place was going to be opening as of a certain date, and they would publish that in advance. At the same time, we took that same document and we created a media advisory with a little more nitty-gritty details that the media needed to cover this opening, this business opening, and invite them to come and cover it in person. And, ribbon cutting details and, what time it's going to happen and things like that. But let's just take a step back and talk about the news release again and sort of how it's valuable, and do we think it's valuable? Do we think it's valuable to reporters, to clients, to other audiences? There has been, and I think I introduced the topic this way, there's been a lot of debate. And in the 20 plus years that I've been doing public relations, I think the popularity of the news release has ebbed and flowed, right? It has, sometimes people love it, sometimes people hate it. There was a period there about 10 years ago where I think everybody said the news release was dead. And I've come to believe that the news release certainly is not dead. And actually, I think the news release can be one of the most important weapons in your arsenal when you are creating news on behalf of clients and when you're broadcasting news on behalf of clients. Here's why. I always start, if we're going to get something out, I always start by writing the news release. Why? Because it functions as a core document. It can function as, it's almost like an exercise. It forces me and it forces my clients to write every detail down. And to organize the thoughts that we want to get out in a very specific way. And if you do it with enough time, you take a couple of days to write this, to kick it back and forth, to brainstorm around it with the client, it forces you to write it down and then to read it back and ask yourself the critical question that I think PR people always have to ask themselves, is this interesting? Like, would anyone care about this? Do I care about this? Does this sound like I would stop and read this if it were printed in a newspaper or if I read it on a website? Would I care? And where is the news? Is it there? Is it on the page? Because you can start out just by sort of filling the page with all the details that you have, and then you kind of organize it. And everybody has their writing style and their writing patterns or their habits. But it forces me to just write it all out and organize the thoughts and then be critical about it and say, is this worthwhile? Is this something that someone's going to care about, or are they just going to hit delete as soon as it slams into their inbox? And if the answer is the latter of those two, then I know I got to go back and I got to dig deeper and I got to go further. Because that is also our job as PR people, as we've got to really dig in and find the news that is going to make it valuable to the reporters and the editors and the news decision makers that we are communicating with, because we want them to act on it. We want them to cover it in whatever way makes sense for them to cover it. We want them to use this information. So we need to give them valuable, actionable information. And so that news release exercise, the writing of the news release exercise, I think is really, really valuable to starting that process. From there, that core document can be massaged into other documents that you may need to create, such as the event advisory. And let's talk about, okay, we're going to have an event. Great. We want to write, you write the news release, which actually would go out either before or even after sometimes the event. And let's take this in sequence, right? You write the news release, and maybe it's something the public, like I said, the example I used before with my client, you want the public to come to this. So you put out a news release in advance saying, hey, this thing is coming, this business is opening, and you put out that news release well in advance of the event. Then, closer to the event, you put out an event advisory, or what I refer to as a media advisory, because now it's not a news release or even a news advisory, because it's not meant to be published. It's a media advisory for coverage purposes, and I put that up on the upper right of the document to let people know this is not necessarily for publication. This is for you guys. This is for media to make a decision about covering this. And then if you do want to cover it, here's all the information: who, what, where, when, why, how, etc. And then maybe even after the event, after we've taken all our photos and our videos and we've got the quotes and all the, maybe the stuff that happened at the event, then we go back, we grab that original news release and we recreate it on the back end and insert all that stuff that happened at the event, and we put out another news release with links to video, with links to photo, or even attaching stuff that makes it a nice, vibrant document that media can use to write and report on the event after it happened, as though they were there. And that is the whole idea, is to be able to deliver information that media can use to report on the thing that you want them to report on. So going back to the whole top of the thing, news releases, I think, incredibly valuable because it forces you to think through the information that you have at your disposal, that you don't have, identify what you don't have at your disposal, and then get your hands on that, and then turn it into the other documents that you need to turn it into. Now, it can also become other things too. When you write that news release and you define that language, and sometimes you need to define really specific language. I'm thinking in terms of, I have financial clients who talk about products in a very specific way. I have healthcare clients talk about procedures in very specific ways, or scientific terms and things like that. Acronyms. Oh my God, acronyms. But sometimes there's really specific language that you need to nail. And very little of it can be broad brush, or very little of it can be kind of off the cuff or sort of common speak, right? Sometimes there's really specific language that you need to use in those news releases. Again, forces you to find that language and put it on the page and spell it correctly. But guilty typo, guilty. But then you can turn it into other things. You can turn it into blog posts. You can turn it into bylines. You can turn it into social media content. And you've got all of the language at your disposal. As I say social media content, I also think about putting into the news release social media handles and tags. If you want, in today's age, news outlets are not just writing a story and putting it in their primary publication. So, it's either the print version of the newspaper, or the broadcast version of the radio spot, or the broadcast version of the TV. They're all putting it online, and they're all putting it on their social media. Don't you want them to tag you in those stories? Don't you want them to, instead of just say your name in the social media post, actually put your handle in the social media post on the appropriate social media platform? Because they're all on Facebook, they're all on Twitter, they're all on Instagram at a minimum. Give them those handles in the news release, in the event advisory, even at the tail end of the blog post or the byline that you deliver to them. Give them that information. And maybe it's not even, it doesn't have to be in the text of it. Maybe it's a note at the bottom, or maybe it's a note at the top, when you send something to them in email. Say, and here are the social media tags. Give them all that information. Don't go make them go hunting for it, because number one, they could screw it up and they could find the wrong one and sort of tag somebody else that's got a similar name. Or two, because you haven't pointed it out, they may not even think of it. And they may just, they got so much to do that they're just going to write it. They'll just throw it up on social media and they won't tag you. Opportunity missed. And that's your fault. As a public relations person taking care of your client, that is your fault that you did not deliver that social media handle or tag. Now, that's not a guarantee that they're going to use it, but better to deliver it and know that you gave it to them, and they know they can use it. I guarantee you they'll appreciate it. If it's sitting there in their email. So always deliver that information to them while we're on the topic of social media. But going back to creating other documents and other vehicles that the news release can generate. You create the news release. It's very easily turned into a byline that you can pitch out, for a column or something like that. It's very easily. At the very least, you can take that news release and the client can post it on their own website in their news section. And they need content for their website too. So now you're helping the client's internal comms people. And you're helping their web team, right? Because you've created that document, they put it on their news release. If they need to communicate it to their internal audience, speaking of internal comms, and we talked last week about, whether or not there's truly any internal comms anymore. But if it's a significant event or a significant piece of news, they're probably going to want to send an email to all the employees. Wouldn't it be great if, instead of making the internal comms people write their own thing, you can just deliver the news release to them, and if they need to mildly tweak it, they can for the purposes of format or how they deliver news to their internal audience, but they've got all the language there and it's consistent. It's consistent. It's the same thing, because that's another byproduct of what we do is we want everyone, when we're making an announcement, we want everyone to be speaking the same language. We want the internal audiences and the external audiences and the media and the people who consume that media and the whole freaking universe to talk about your thing in the same way, with the same language. And just, put the shoe on the other foot for a minute and use it for instance. When people are calling one thing 7 different things, it engenders confusion. And that is another key part of our job as PR people representing our clients is our job is to eliminate confusion, get rid of crosstalk and static and make it streamlined and linear and one language, right? It's called one thing. Make sure everybody calls it that one thing. Super important. And it all starts with writing that news release and getting that language down. So a core document to organize thought easily turned into other vehicles like media advisories, blog posts, bylines, social media posts, even stuff for the client on their website, their internal comms. So I think it's essential. I think it's fantastic, and I would love to hear your feedback on this. How you use news releases, whether or not you like them, whether or not you think reporters pick them up. Actually, let's talk about that for a minute. Do reporters use news releases? I think they do. And here's why, is because if a news release is well written, it will, and it's pertinent to what they do, and they find value in the information that's coming to them. It jumpstarts what they need to do on their end. It's not going to get printed exactly the way you sent it. Some places it will. And boy, we celebrate those. Those are typically smaller outlets or outlets that have, let's say, fewer employees, right? I'm thinking of certain websites, certain news websites, things like that, where they're really just cutting and pasting and putting your news release up there. And sometimes they even say, according to a news release submitted by or what have you. But for the other outlets, sort of the further up the ladder, they'll use the news release and they'll say, oh, this is interesting. This is important. Okay, this is news that we need to report on. There's the basics in here. Let me make a phone call. Let me send an email back. Let me get some more information. And let me ask some questions that are specific for me and for my publications audience. So the news release will jumpstart a reporter's job and a reporter's interest in what you're doing. Now, you got to realize any reporter is getting between, I'm going to just throw out crazy numbers, but I mean, between 50 and 500 emails a day with news releases from people wanting them to report on their thing. And I'm not going to put down anybody's news because everybody's news is important to them. And the way I describe it to clients is that, great, it's important to you. We need to make your news important to reporters and important to the reporters' audiences, because that's how you get coverage. But I do think that reporters use news releases to jumpstart what they do. I think you got to be really good at writing your news release for when you send it to a reporter, because it either catches in the first 5 seconds or it doesn't. It's the subject line and maybe the first paragraph, as long as the first paragraph is 2 sentences long. You got about 10 seconds. So you got to grab their attention right up front, right away. Make it actionable. That's the phrase that I use. Always make the information that you are sending to reporters actionable. They look at it, they go, yep, I need this. Yep, I can do this. Yep, this is important. And that jump starts the process. However, then they're going to report it. Because if it's not actionable, if they got to look at it and they go, what is this thing? It's gone. That's it. It's over. It happens that fast. And I know all you dyed-in-the-wool PR people out there know that, but it happens that fast. That said, too, how do you deliver those news releases? I deliver them one-off. I have a list of the key reporters that I need to talk to for each of my clients. And they're not hundreds and thousands long. It can be, it's all the main outlets in either the geography or the subject matter area that the client operates in. And I one-off just sort of copy and paste each one. I have a little system, but copy and paste a release to each individual reporter. Now, some offices I might put, a couple people on the same email from the same outlet. And there are some that like, the info at inbox. Fine, I put that on there too. But I never, ever blast to a list. I don't find it to be effective. Because you can also, when you send a news release to individual reporters, editors, assignment editors, whoever you're talking to, you can put a quick little note at the top. Hey, how's it going? Or hey, this is happening tomorrow. Or hey, thought of you on this. Whatever. That helps. It helps a ton. And even if they don't use it, it helps to keep the relationship alive. And that's another key thing about what we do. When we're talking to reporters and editors, when we're talking to news decision makers, is keeping those relationships alive, and having them have a good opinion of the information we're bringing to them, regardless of whether or not they do that story that day. Because a wonderful mentor of mine, one of the most important professional people in my life, told me, and I'll never forget this, sitting across her desk, it's not about this hit. It's about the next hit. And she was absolutely right. And she's one of the best people in the business. She's 100% right. It's not just about this hit. It's about the next hit. It's about the relationship that you have with those people who you're sending information to, and making sure that they feel that what you bring them is important enough to, get 10 seconds of their day to look over what you've sent them. And maybe it works this time and maybe it doesn't. But you'll get to a place, if you build that relationship with those people, that it works more often than not. And even though we joke about PR being the business of getting used to hearing the word no, you'll hear the word yes a lot more often if what you bring to reporters is actionable, is smart, is usable, and is pertinent to what they do. So that flows into the conversation about whether or not we use paid services to distribute news releases. Now, I'm not trying to dump on any paid services. They're a business; they need to get paid, and certainly people use them. I don't, for the same reason that I don't blast news releases to a long list of reporters. There are very rare cases where I might. I can probably count them on two fingers, but I never use paid news release services. I just find that they are very expensive. I find that they claim to provide metrics that I don't find particularly valuable. And I find that, going back to what we said about the news release jumpstarting a reporter's interest, the news release is rarely, if ever, going to show up exactly the way you wrote it, except for the bots that these paid news release services speak to. So you can blast, and this has been my experience, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Put it on the Facebook page. Let's tweet about it. I've used paid news services before, news release distribution services before. Paid $1,500 to put out a 750-word news release. You blast it out. You get a report the next morning that it's shown up on 147,000 news websites, and they send you this great list with all the little logos and what looks like an Excel spreadsheet with all the metrics, and you got 1.5 billion hits, and wow, isn't that great? And you go on Google and you can't find a damn one of them, because they're buried in the back of these news websites where nobody goes. And unless you go to specifically search for them by keyword, you're not going to find it. And so I don't find much value in blasting out. And my beef is about blasting out, right? My beef is about not going to the reporters that are going to do something with what you're giving them. It's not with the paid news services as much as it is with just the complete inaccuracy of what it gives you. It doesn't give you anything of value. And if we're talking about value, you're trying to deliver value to your client by getting them coverage that not only they see, but that their stakeholders see. You want them to know that this news is landing in places that people are seeing it. Because what you want is for the coverage to be valuable, and then for their phone to ring and go, "Hey, I saw this in the blah 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 paper. I saw this on the blah 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 website, or I saw this on TV." Or that's what you want. You don't want this to be buried in the back of some, it's great. Oh, you're on NBCnews.com. That's fantastic. Where are you? You're not on the homepage. You're not anywhere under any of the news menus, right? Where are you? Oh, you're on this page that's got like 17,000 digits on it in the URL, and just it's this thing that they just it's like off to the side. It's buried under a hay bale somewhere. So I don't use paid services to distribute news releases. I have my key list. I one-off copy and paste, and I send it to those reporters who I either have a relationship with, I want to have a relationship with, I know can use this potentially, because you're always crossing your fingers a little bit when you send it out to people you don't know. But you're sending it to people where it makes sense. And that's another key part about building the relationship, is that if a reporter gets some information and they look at it and they go, "Well, I'm not going to use that, but yeah, that made sense." What you don't want is for the people to write back and go, "This is awful, take me off your list." That's like, arrow through the heart for a PR person, to get that email from a reporter. And that comes from blasting out, right? That I've never got that email back from someone who I've copy and pasted to ever in 20 years. I have got that email back from people who I've blasted to. So take that for what it's worth. That's certainly my experience. I make sure that I'm really smart, or as smart as I can be, because I'm not that smart, about who I'm sending it to and what I'm asking them to do with it. So that is a very robust and very long winded conversation about what I do with news releases, what I think about news releases. Here's the most important part. I want to know what you think about news releases. I want to hear conversation on our Facebook page. I want to get tweets about this. And if you disagree with me, I want you to email me, I want you to DM me, and I want you to let me know that I am totally full of it and you want to come on the PR podcast and talk about this and tell me why I'm wrong, because I would love to hear varying opinions about this if they're out there. And it's because I think it's a key part of what we do. And certainly it's the whole reason that we're here every week, is to share information, share perspectives, and do our jobs just a little bit better. So that's our show. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Appold. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials, and online at jodyfisherpr.com. We will see you next time on the PR Podcast.